It is so fantastic on behalf of the organizers. It's so fantastic uh, for PO, Asif, RO, and Lakshman, and a couple others. I'm sorry if I missed your names. Akhil, to give me an opportunity to share my thoughts with you. Yes, these are, how do you say, tough times with the virus situation, but then it's also equally a great opportunity to come together online and continue the good work that we do. So, my sincere thanks to the organizers. And I also want to thank our good friend Ange Serbolis for enabling the Teams environment for us. And Teams is just phenomenal in being able to get so many people on a platform and being able to collaborate. So with that, let's get started. My name is Sanjiv Venkataram, and with me at some point during the presentation, I'll have Mr. Shashi Kumar and Mr. Rakilesh Dubey join us. They're not here with us right now. They had a little bit of a thing to attend to. Okay. And the topic for the day, for this 45 minutes for my speak, is around CDS or Common Data Service and auditing on Common Data Service, and as to how, for a business user, the auditing is actually an absolutely first-rate experience, and we'll go through that, shortly. Okay. Now, a little bit of background and introduction. Akhilesh is actually with KPMG as a pre-sales lead. He's also a Microsoft certified trainer. I should actually say MCT here. And besides, he's a wonderful, wonderful gentleman. He's part of the community across both databases, business applications, et cetera, et cetera. So it's fantastic to have him as a community member and as a good friend. Shashi is again a good friend of ours. He's as well part of the community, the Singapore community here, and we're both with Prudentia Consulting. And insofar as I'm concerned, the community is probably the best thing that has actually happened to me in being able to meet people with, like-minded, let's say, people under one roof, and being able to share all this wonderful content and learn from, and as well along the way get some certifications, etc., help on certifications, if you will. So it's overall, and then overall, just have some fun along the way. So it's a great community that we have in Singapore and across ASEAN. Um, okay, over to the agenda. We're actually going to cover a tiny little bit of detail on auditing basics, then look at common data service, 101, and then switch over to a demo for most of the hour to actually see how we can, how a business user, as an example, can actually see the output of actions that their colleagues have actually done on apps. Okay. And finally, we're going to recap the whole thing and summarize. Okay. With that, let's get right into it. So, auditing basics, the need for auditing, this is hopefully nothing new, especially for the database community. If most of you people are on the database side, this is brass tacks for you. And especially nowadays, given the data explosion and the faster and easier access to data, there is a greater need for actually making sure that there is data governance, and at the end, we're able to actually have good accountability and traceability. Okay. Then, with this, obviously, as we just said, comes greater chances of data misuse, and we have had quite a number of cases in the past of data misuse, and hence the need for auditing. And this is also the reason why governments across the globe are implementing or have implemented standards for auditing. As an example, HIPAA, the Healthcare Information Privacy and Protection Act in the United States for healthcare. We've got Sarbanes-Oxley, that's been around for quite a number of years now in finance. And then in financial services, you've got Basel and Basel II that call out these requirements. Okay, so extremely important. While there is a lot of excitement on the data side and being able to create data, transform data, analyze data, equally important is actually governance and making sure that we actually have a good trail of what the footprint has been from a data standpoint. Okay, this is how much I'll say about auditing. Then, from a common data service perspective, and we'll actually get into the environment in a couple of minutes, so I'm not gonna, how do you say, seeing is believing, as they say. So, the basics from a CDS perspective is that it stores and manages data used by business applications. Okay, in a nutshell, it's got very rich metadata and incorporates logic and validation. As an example, business rules, calculated formulas that you actually use in your day-to-day business processes. Okay, and then it is relatively easy and very secure, obviously, and relatively easy to manage. So this makes it very, shall I say, close to the heart to the business user. And behind the scenes, we can take a look at a quick little graphic. Behind the scenes has got Azure DB for relational data, blob storage for non-relational data, and Cosmos DB for logs, and so on and so forth. So it brings together a whole bunch of Azure services in being able to stand up a fantastic environment for app developers, for app users, for and most importantly, for the business users. And auditing, in this case, as you will see, simply put, is a pleasure. Okay. With that, let's actually get into the demo. So what we have here, and I'm gonna go to my Power Apps environment here. So what I've done here is, can everybody see this? I just want to make sure before I run away and say a whole bunch of things.
Yes,
Um, yeah, wonderful, Pio. So what we have here is my Power Apps environment. Okay, so if I go to make.powerapps.com or powerapps.com, I'm able to log in with my Office 365 credentials. And Power Apps is part of an umbrella of Power Platform where it allows users to actually input data into the system. And then it is a sister or a brother, have your pick, of Power BI, which allows people to actually get data from the system and visualize it. So ingress into the system through Power Apps, outgress from Power BI is how I look at it. And then what connects these systems, among others, is Flow or Power Automate. That think of it as the data source being like a water tank in the one end. Then you've got the faucet in the other end, which could be, either your apps or BI or what have you. And Power Automate is the plumbing that actually connects the two of them. So it's an end-to-end beautiful system that Microsoft has actually enabled us with. Okay. So if I'm in the Power Apps environment and if I scroll up a little bit, as you log in, you will see, the home environment. There is a little bit of information on learning. You can see all your apps here. You can create tabs. And then further, right down below, there is this little portion for data. And under data, you see these things called as entities. Okay. And as you scroll through it, you can actually see a whole slew of entities that are actually available by default. As an example, accounts, address, appointment, all of these things that actually come native and embedded in this common data service environment. So when I click on these entities, you walk smack right into the common data service environment, okay? And that has default entities and it has custom entities like the one out here that is an entity for capturing device information, as an example, PC information, okay? Now, entities are nothing more than tables in SQL Azure. That's kind of the corollary that you can actually think of. And you have a whole slew of tables, and then you build out your schema with relationships, etc. So we'll briefly touch upon that in a second. As an example, if I open up this devices environment, I can add a whole bunch of fields. Now, these fields are nothing more than columns. Think of it as columns in your database, in your SQL database, okay? And then with all these, how do you say, fields come relationships. You know relationships from the SQL environment, so you can actually build out your star schema. What is interesting is that you can actually come out with business rules, and these could be as complex as you want or as simple as you want, hopefully simple. And that actually gives you the ability to set up, your partially your business process flows by adopting some rules. Okay. I'm not going to spend much time on views, forms, or dashboards or whatever. From a SQL standpoint, just to give you, how do you say, what do you call that, an equivalent, you can actually see that you can set up primary keys and to be able to relate tables together. And finally, the data itself is actually captured like so. I've got a whole slew of custom fields here, but if I get to my custom fields, it actually gives you a beautiful view of all the data that's actually been created and captured in one place. Okay, so as an example, this has got some device information, the nature of devices, the category, the pricing, the discounts, etc. Equally, it has also got information on who actually has modified the data, who has modified the data on what date, who's the owner of this, and then a whole slew of what you call, like, we just talked about a portion of the CRUD, but then create, update, and delete. Or these operations are beautifully captured here in the table itself. So you don't actually have to go in and set it up, unlike in other places. Okay. So I hope that gives you I trust is a powerful word, I suppose. So I trust this actually gives you a, an overview of what CDS actually looks like from an Outlook standpoint. Okay, in case you haven't actually used CDS before or Common Data Service before. Okay, now from here, what we do is before we use this either in a BI environment or actually in a app environment, which is more likely the case because CDS actually comes to us from the application world. Dynamics CRM, as an example, uses CDS. Your Power Apps, we are in the Power Apps environment, actually uses CDS in the background, among other data sources. Okay, so before we go in, we actually have to set up our auditing. Okay, and for auditing, to setting up auditing, I'm actually going to click on the admin center. Okay, when I go to the admin center here, I get this interface, which actually gives me the environment in which I can actually set up the audit. In this case, I'm in the Prudentia Consulting environment, and you could have as many environments as you want, depending on what you're actually trying to achieve. Okay. And as you look at this environment and look at the settings, so I'm in my environment, which is Prudential Consulting, and within which I've got settings, right? And as I click on my settings, you will actually see a whole bunch of menus, one of which is actually audit and logs. And here is where you can actually set up your audit, which means audit settings. You can set them up here in sub menus and then further actually view the audit details in the audit summary view. Okay, so if I actually click on audit log management, it takes me to this interface. And if you folks have actually seen Dynamics before, in the back end, this actually, excuse me, this actually looks like the Dynamics CRM environment, right? And you have all your entities on the right-hand side, in which I've got my devices environment. And then once I click on my devices environment, it actually opens up and gives me a whole slew of menus, one of which, excuse me, sorry, so one of which is actually data services. And under data services, I'm going to actually go ahead and select auditing. And by default, as this says, all fields of this entities are enabled for auditing, and you can actually choose the respective fields you want to audit, from the right-hand side. As an example, if I actually open this up, I get this menu for fields, and I can get into individual fields and actually set up the auditing rules. Okay, and you can either do single record auditing, log a record when it's actually opened, or you can actually do multiple record auditing, which means anything and everything that is within the purview of auditing enabled for a particular field is actually captured. Okay, so with that, let us actually get into an app. All right, so let us do this in action. So I have with me here, if I go back to my Power Apps environment and get into my apps, I have here a whole slew of applications, okay, that I've been actually playing with. Some are actually real applications, etc., etc. I have one here that we traditionally actually run for what is called as an app in a day, which is this device ordering app, okay? And then conventionally, the data for this device ordering app, which is a very straightforward, simple app, is actually in Excel. But what we've done here is that we've actually gotten this data and literally uploaded it to CDS. And I'll pause on that for a second. What I'm going to do is to get into my CDS environment and actually show you how we can actually get data here. If I say get data, it pops open this, how do you say, lovely interface from which I can select out whatever different sources I want to. It's got a plethora of sources out here. I'm going to close this for a second, right? I mean, it's got a whole bunch. My favorites actually Azure SQL database, but then equally you have others, SharePoint list, etc. That you can bring the data here, and the next step is actually that it leads you to Power Query, where you can actually do all your transformations. So it is a very user-friendly sort of an environment, especially for business users to come in and set up their table. I mean, obviously you need to have the right permissions, etc. From our good friends, our good DBA friends. Okay, so that's how you actually, let us say, get data. So that data, once the table is actually in, is connected to the app. I'll quickly, let's say, edit this app. Give me a minute. I can just show you the canvas for a couple seconds before we actually run the app itself. Okay. Give me a second. I'm just going to show you the connections in the how do you say, to make the experience full, and then we'll get into using the app and putting some data in CDS. Okay. Don't mind the, how do you say, the canvas here. We'll leave that alone. If I were to click on this thing that looks like data source, I've got a few CDS sources here. One is devices, the other one is manufacturing. I've also got Office 365 connected up here, okay, as an example. So, and it's extraordinarily easy to actually connect these entities. If I open these up, I see my CDS entities right next to me, and all I need to do is click on them, and it gets selected as a data source, okay? We'll leave this alone, and then I'm gonna get out of this environment, and we'll actually get into the app itself. So the app actually looks like so. All we're basically trying to do is we have about, in the CDS environment, we have about 117 devices available to us, PC devices available to us in our database. And then we actually look at the devices by category and then make a few selections, compare them, and then actually click one to submit a request to our management to approve. And that's about all we're actually trying to do here. Okay. So as this little section, this little, for the lack of a better word, a data card tells us we've got about 117 devices available. And if I were to select HP or Lenovo, In Lenovo, I've got about like 14 selections of the devices, and I'm comparing about 3 of them, right? I can compare 4, but 3, 4, whatever, So I've got these devices, and I hit compare, and it actually brings up this environment where I am going to be selecting a particular device. My internet is, how do you say, interesting is the right word. So it is still fetching the data for us to display. But then let us say I click on this, I'll move ahead and I submit the request. There was a problem here with the data source. Okay, I'm gonna actually cancel out for a quick second, go back to my apps and then edit the app here. Give me a second, folks. And I hear a pings on the call. I assume this is actually people logging on to the call. Is that right, PO?
Yeah, those are people joining in. Although we
Gotcha.
do have one question on the chat if you want to answer right now, or
Let me get the source. Let me save this guy and get the how do you say source sorted out, and then we'll answer the question.
yep, yeah, we can do it later. Yeah,
Yeah, as we go, right? So if I were to let us say play this app here, and I go to Lenovo, I see my PCs. Hopefully, I have no issues with my internet, and I will. There you go. Now I see my device information on the right for any of these devices. I pick, let us say, one that's most expensive because I'm, how do you say, one of those Maharajas, right? So, and I'm just going to hit submit, and hopefully this time the data actually goes into the database, right? And if I were to go over to my audit summary here and then refresh this environment, I should see a new record being created at 921 on 314. Okay. And before I actually bring up the record, let me get into Teams and look at what the chat says here. Um, Someone says hello. Hello. The audio sound is low. Oh no. Uh, PO, is that an issue? I mean, is that specific to the gentleman, or is it everywhere low?
I think it's maybe specific for the because we are able to listen your voice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no issues, right?
I think yeah, suppose okay.
Okay, wonderful. And maybe this is also a good checkpoint to see if Akhil is actually there. No, unfortunately, he is. He's a bit under the weather. So we'll get back to our environment here, right? And so I have a clean, let us say, list. If I'm a business user and I have a very clean list of what has actually been entered into the system, and the record has actually been captured. If I right mouse on it and open the record, lo and behold, I have an outstanding interface of what I actually see, what I've actually, or what me or users have actually entered into the system. Okay. As an example, this says the device that I asked for is the IdeaPad, whatever, and then the owner is me. It has been requested by, Sanjeev, and here is the email address. And then it's actually picked up the price, and the status is active because it's actually gone to my manager for approval. Okay. It is a beautiful, beautiful, simple actually output that one can actually get from CDS. I hope this is, or I trust again is a very strong positive word. So I trust this actually gives you an idea of how CDS is able to capture inputs from the app, and the beautiful output that you actually see that is very user friendly, right? I mean, as you see this, extremely user friendly for business users. And let me give you a couple scenarios as to where this has been very, very handy, right? For small to mid-sized organizations where you don't have a lot of IT support and where you actually have to stand up and as business users, you have to do a bunch of digging on your own with, let us say, partners, Microsoft partners, such as Prudentia. There is not a whole lot that one can actually setting up the SQL environment from a DBA standpoint, making sure the audit comes out right, and you take the audit logs and you actually put them in like Power BI, sort them, make sure they look good, etc., right? That's a whole lot of effort that the small and medium businesses may not actually be able to afford. In these sort of scenarios, this is phenomenal actually to me. Being able to see the output in such a pristine way. And let us understand this as well, right? Finance lead, or let us say an operations lead, chances are that you're not going to be doing this audit operation every day. Maybe might be once a week, or when there is a conflict and then somebody asks you, or you want to go and pull up the audit trail to see what the user's actually done. In those sort of scenarios, this comes in extremely handy because this looks like the output from a packaged application. As an example, if you're actually using either the Dynamics 365 environment, or other applications such as Anaplan or whatever, which is basically a management information systems tool, auditing by default is part of that package. And whoever the provider is, make sure that that environment is very user friendly for people to go in and actually check whatever they have to check. And when you're building bespoke applications and Power Apps, which is gonna mushroom out, it's gonna from what I can see, it's an amazing environment to actually be creative and then express your creativity in terms of business processes and apps. This is going to become vital because in an environment where you lack resources and in an environment where you don't have, how do you say, the depth of the technical depth needed to actually look at your audits and make sure audits actually make sense. CDS auditing is like a, how do you say, dark alley. You're really scared. Don't worry, CDS will take care of you. And as you can actually see, right, the logs are there. They look really beautiful. Okay. Um, and then it didn't take a whole lot to actually set this up. As you saw, it didn't take a whole lot for me to actually set this up and get this output. Now, on the comparative side, and I typically don't actually get into comparisons, but to actually to do a comparison, if I were to bring out, let us say, the native output from, let's say, SQL Azure, right? So one can actually connect apps to absolutely anything. And let us say I take the app and I connect it to SQL Azure. The output, the native raw output from the storage account comes out like so. Okay. And in this one, I mean, as you initially, like, let us say you are, you know, in management, you're how do you say, senior finance lead, or like even in IT, if you are the CIO, etc., of a small organization. When you are a CIO of a small organization, it is you and your shadow. There is no big team behind you, right? But Microsoft does enable you to actually live. And then if you were to look at the output of the app that has been captured in SQL Azure into a storage account, the native output looks like so, right? And one could say, hey, look, I don't actually speak Babylonian, so help with this. Um, you know, it basically here is saying that, look, I mean, I'm executing this query on a particular table, and then this is the column on which I've actually made the changed columns, and then this is the parameter that's actually been changed. In this case, it's the employee ID. And then these are I've redacted this obviously, for purposes of security, because this is a live environment. And then this actually tells me these are the new values that have been input by the user, and these were the old values. So what is the end user interested in? It's the new value, what was the old value, and who actually made the change. That's about it. Be brief, be gone. And to get that sort of like data, I literally have to, I get an output that looks like this. And at first instance, it is nearly impossible, as you can imagine, to take this and actually put it in front of business users because they're going to be completely lost, right? I mean, they don't speak the language, and it is literally impossible for them to make sense of the data and then live the data, right? Hence, what we do is we take this information, put it in Power BI. There is a connector, and we put it in Power BI. We do whatever we have to do and extract it out. Now, we can save ourselves a little bit of trouble here by actually looking at, let us say, the CDS output that kind of looks like so, right? Compare a little bit of this to a little bit of that out of the box without actually having to do anything, right? So that is the, let's just say, advantage of actually CDS to business users, where all the hard work behind the scenes is actually done by Microsoft, and it enables us an environment where we can actually look at the data in a very sort of clean and an elegant way. Okay. And again, you can connect connect CDS to either applications or BI environment or what have you, right? So to sort of do a little bit of recap, if you will, auditing is extremely important, especially nowadays as there has been a data explosion. It's very important to have a proper trail. Point one. Point two, CDS or Common Data Service is an amazing abstracted layer of data storage and management that Microsoft has enabled with SQL, Azure, and all of other Azure services being there behind the scenes to actually support us. And thirdly, as we connect CDS to business applications or things like the BI environment, it becomes extremely easy for end users to actually A, set up this environment, and B, being able to actually track the user's actions. Okay, so in a nutshell, it is an extraordinarily first-rate, beautiful experience in Common Data Service. Okay, I know I'm a little, how do you say, ahead of time here. Let me pause a little bit and actually to look at maybe the, what do you call, let me look at the chat window for any sort of questions.
Yeah, if you scroll up, there's a question from Tumit
Uh,
Gamad.
1 second.
There you go.
Yes, it's Sumit, welcome to the virtual data camp. Very nice to have you. I don't want to make assumptions, and I will. I assume you're actually from Sri Lanka, so a very warm welcome
Yes,
to you.
yes. Thanks, Sanjeev.
Most
I'm
welcome,
from Sri
buddy.
Lanka.
Most welcome. Very glad to have you here. So yes, you can actually control access based on screens and entities. So you ask a very important question, and there are two different things here. One is access to the entities themselves, right? The underlying tables and the underlying fields. So one can actually set up role-based access, much like you would actually set up in a SQL Azure database, or let us say in Power BI. You can actually set that access up in CDS, okay? And you can say, you have your CRUD is one thing. You can also set up what are known as keys, right? What do these keys actually do? It identifies, let us say, me or you as a user to have only user access to the database. You can actually have business unit access, which is one level higher. Let us say it's a business team. Or you can actually have organizational level access to the database if you're like PO, who is a database admin, right?
Okay.
So that is at the database level. Now, on the application side, since you say screens, it can take on a few dimensions. One dimension is if you're on Canvas app, which is what you saw here. Let me just bring this up for 2 seconds. If you're on a Canvas app like so, in this case, depending on, let us say I'm actually a requestor of like this PC and you are my manager, depending on the roles that have actually been set up in the Common Data Service as either a user or a manager, we can pass our email IDs as variables, right? And then
Okay.
compare them to the roles that are there in the database and then send people to the appropriate screens. You
Based
follow,
on the
right?
email IDs, you said, no?
That's based on the
Right.
email ID and the roles that have actually been
Okay.
set up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you're a manager, if you're my manager and I'm making a request,
Yeah.
on your screen, as you log into the application, you will actually see a summary dashboard of all the requests that have actually come to you, one of which is my request, right? And that is through your email and roles. And for me, as I'm making a request, all I need to know is like, hey, how many devices, blah, 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 some base information, and what is the status of my request, right? So I hope that kind of gives you an idea as to how
Yes.
you,
Yes. That clarified. Yes. Thank you, Sanjeev.
yeah, most welcome, sir. Let me actually see, is there anyone else here? Okay, session evaluation, etc. I would also welcome someone like Yo. I'm not sure if my good friend Naginder is on the call, maybe Naginder as well, to actually come in and maybe offer some ideas, suggestions, etc. In I'm by no means an expert. I'm a community member, much like you folk, to come in and actually offer any kind of thoughts that they have actually seen. I mean, from an auditing end output standpoint, this is kind of what I see, which is for me amply adequate. Okay. But if you
Yeah,
guys have any thoughts, kindly let us know.
yeah. The gender is not yet on the call, but yeah, this one is great because, like you said, it's something that the business users can understand
Yeah,
fairly quickly compared to the other logs that you can mine from Azure or from the database itself.
right. And the amazing thing about CDS is that you still have it's not still, you have the enormous power of Azure underneath, right? So as you store data into CDS, it could be relational data that you're actually seeing here as audit. It could actually be images that you're like, storing in either like, Cosmos, your Azure blobs, or, in let us say, in a smaller SharePoint environment. All of this actually is within the Microsoft umbrella, very well integrated. And then you're able to see the actions as to what was the old one, what's the new one out here as output. Okay. Um, Let me see if there is anything else. Yeah, a couple other, while we're in this CDS kind of a discussion, I could also do the same thing on the Power BI side. But on the Power BI side, it's a bit more obvious, right? Because Power BI itself actually has all the records. You can connect CDS from an outgress standpoint. Here, what we did with an app is actually take the data, put it into the database, right? From the other side, I could actually get into Power BI and pull out the data and visualize it. And as I visualize it, we could get back to the future a little bit and do what we do with SQL Azure is pull the logs into Power BI and visualize them. But that is overkill because natively SQL, I mean CDS actually gives you a beautiful interface to do your audits. Okay. Um, I know I'm a little early. We still have about 7 minutes. Let us see. My interest is actually in being able to take a few questions if people have questions. I know the one on the screens is a classic. Um, Anyone else have any thoughts, any questions? Otherwise, what I'm going to do, I know I'm about 5 minutes early in the speak, and I can actually hand it back. Or, PO, is it okay if I do a quick little, since a lot of people are actually joining, I see, shall I do a quick little summary and then we'll call it?
Yeah, it'll be better, Sanjeev. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. So again, if I were to get back to my environment, we started off with CDS that actually is an abstraction layer over SQL Azure and kind of looks like so. When you log into your Power Apps environment, CDS looks like so with a whole bunch of what is called as entities. Entities you can think of as tables in SQL Azure. And then from there, you can actually create either you have your native entities or you can actually create custom entities. From there, for a particular entity, you can actually get to the Power Apps Admin Center and get into your audit, how do you say, environment, and get into your audit logs. And before you get into your audit logs, obviously you're going to set them up. So you have audit settings, and audit settings look like so. The environment looks like CRM behind the scenes. And then for any particular tables or fields, you can actually go in and select your auditing method, be it either a single record or multiple records. And then from there, as you write to the Common Data Service and visualize the audit, it comes in like so in a very sort of elegant way. And then finally, as you open up a particular entry, it looks like so. Who made the change? What was the old value? What's the new value? And who was the request made by? And that's it. Okay, it's extremely elegant. I think we are up on time, and I've also, how do you say, that was a good question from someone. If folks don't have any more questions, let me do this and hand it back to PO and Asif. And thank you very much for the opportunity. It's fantastic to be here with the community.